Hello, everyone. GM. Welcome back to another episode of Overpriced JPEGs. It is currently 2 a.m, and I am recording this introduction because the one I recorded earlier today at a more reasonable hour did not record, and that is because apparently my microphone is not working, and I don't know why. So if you're watching this on YouTube, you can see I'm holding a phone up to my face. That's because I'm recording the sound for this on my phone. If you are listening to this on a podcast, you may have not even noticed anything strange at all, so you can disregard this. In any case, we are a hot mess over here at Overpriced JPEGs and need to figure out what is wrong with our microphone before we have our interview tomorrow. That is not the point of today, though. The point of today is this amazing interview that I did. I say interview, but really it was like a cross-collaborative episode between myself, Overpriced JPEGs, and the team over at Generation C, the awesome Coindesk podcast hosted by Sam Ewen and Avery Akkineni. Sam is the SVP over at Coindesk Studios. He runs Consensus, has for years. Avery Akkineni has been on the show before. Folks might know her. She is the president of Vayner3. And we are talking all about ticketing, NFT ticketing, and live events and the live events industry. Both these folks have a lot of experience in that, maybe Sam in particular, but obviously Avery has been very involved in VCon. So we started talking about just the live events industry writ large, and then NFT ticketing and really where it can plug into this whole thing. Folks who have been longtime listeners of this show know that I'm a huge fan, very excited about NFT ticketing, as I know many of us are. So we get into that. And then we really get into the specifics about how Sam is thinking about NFT ticketing for Coindesk. This is the first year they're doing that. How Vayner is thinking and even in some ways rethinking ticketing for VCon. I think we even get a little VCon alpha in this. I don't think it's confirmed alpha, but Avery speculates as to some things that felt like alpha to me as a VFriends holder. Anyway, I think you're going to love this episode. We also do get a little bit into what I'm doing with the OPJ tour. Oh man, there is so much to think about with this. And I just want everyone to know that I am at every turn trying to think of you guys, my audience, and the holders of the OPJ NFT. I'm keeping you guys top of mind in every decision we make. So we get a little into that. There will be more coming out soon about the OPJ tour and about the gin. I'm really excited. I'm really excited at the lineup of guests we're having for this tour. I just think it's going to be amazing, and I can't wait to be able to share more with you, but I can't just yet. So you'll learn a little bit. You will get a little bit of alpha. You'll learn a little bit in this conversation, but more will be revealed in time. And with that, I'm going to go to bed because this unexpected twist in my night was having to record this intro at 2 a.m. before the episode goes out. The life of podcasting. All right. Well, thank you for listening. Enjoy this episode. And before we dive in, we do need to hear a word from our lovely sponsors who make this show possible. I am so excited to announce that this year, Overpriced JPEGs has partnered with OPENSEA, the world's leading NFT marketplace built for everyone, creators, collectors, noobs, and experts alike. I'm an OPENSEA user because they have the best selection of NFTs and a truly inclusive view of the ecosystem, supporting 8 chains and 8 global languages. I trust the systems they've put in place to keep the space safe, like copyright protection, malicious URL detection and removal, robust verification, and more. It's why they are the place to buy, sell, and create NFTs. That's right. You know OPENSEA, you use OPENSEA, but did you know that OPENSEA now has drops? New exclusive projects launch every week from top projects and creators, and you can check them out now using the link in the show notes. They also recently introduced self-serve drops, which is in beta, and allows creators to launch their projects right on OPENSEA. This drops product gives creators access to tools like rich storytelling drop pages, multi-chain support, and drop mechanic customization. The full launch for self-serve drops is coming this spring. So check out the upcoming drops on OPENSEA right now using the link in the show notes and own what moves you. You'll also be supporting the show in the process. So excited for this, y'all. Sam, Avery, a little OPJ Gen C crossover. Very fun.
We love a collab. Thank you for having us, Carly.
It's what we're all about here in NFTs, you know?
We should have worn matching outfits.
What a miss, guys. That's what we needed. Overpriced generation.
Right. 90s
merch.
band shirts.
Yeah, exactly. All right. I know we have a lot we want to get into in this episode. I think there's going to be a lot of good to come out of this. Let's start by just level setting people a little bit on the macro live events industry. it's obviously had like a rocky number of years with the COVID stuff, but it's also like a thriving industry. So Sam, I think you have maybe the biggest insight here and would love to have you just like kick us off with what's going on.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the live events industry is actually one of the oldest in the world, right? And especially when we think of like in America, if you imagine when like Ringling Brothers would literally like walk elephants through the Brooklyn tunnels in order to get to Manhattan, and or all the folks who would like go town to town to set up these big circuses and carnivals and concerts and theater, and all of that was always a really, really big industry, and really also paved the way for advertising in general, which I think is also kind of interesting. The idea that sort of putting up notices, flyers, postings in small towns was one of the first ways that people communicated with each other. So the exhibition industry has been a really big one. Just for like level setting, it's a $1.5 trillion industry by 2028, according to recent research. Every single sector of it is growing. And when they say sectors, we think about that in both concerts, but also sporting events, corporate events, exhibitions and expos and conferences. Every sector of it is growing. The largest growth right now is coming from 21 to 40-year-olds. So when you think about that, folks with disposable income, which are sort of bringing, more experiences to their lives than stuff to their lives. And I think that's also like a way to think about it. Even last year, Disney, and granted we're coming out of the pandemic still to some degree, but a 72% growth in parks and exhibitions at Disney. So there's just a lot of stuff happening. What's really funny when you think about the general arc of experiences is like it had this really kind of big rise until television came around. When television came around, everyone stayed home and stopped going to experiences. And so it was really only after kind of like World War II, people started to come again. But the big jump in the experiential industry starts around social media. So when Facebook, when Instagram, all that comes around, people then start to say, well, I need content to put on my socials. And you see a giant explosion happen in that world too. And so I think it's pretty fascinating. I don't think it's a coincidence, for example, that you have social starting, in the mid 2000s, and then in 2010, Ticketmaster and Live Nation come together to form this like exhibition monopoly powerhouse. And why? Because everyone wants to go to a show and take their phone out. I think it's really interesting for us to level set that up, for us to have a conversation about, while we also know it's a really hard business to be in. So that's something I think that we should also have a conversation about.
Well, it's so interesting. I feel like that's such a classic example of, I'm sure when social was first coming out and certainly with the internet and people are like, oh my gosh, no, like nobody's ever going to, go have real experiences anymore because they just have social media, and it's the opposite, right? Like it ends up fueling the opposite dynamic. It's just like unforeseeable consequences of technology that, people want to project about. And I'm sure we'll have plenty of that with blockchain where people are like, oh no, it's going to kill this, that, or the other thing. And who knows what it might instead actually fuel. Is there anything we want to talk about more on like Ticketmaster, Live Nation? And I feel like, that's just been in the public consciousness in a way that the public was not really aware of that monopoly and the extractive practices, maybe call it writ large in the events industry, that I feel like the Taylor Swift ticket fiasco really put into like front and center. I don't know, maybe just like the general problems with live events, even while we understand there's a lot of opportunity.
So a fun fact about me is that my first internship was actually at Live Nation in Nashville, Tennessee. I'm from Nashville. And because of that, I knew a lot of people who worked in the music industry. And Live Nation, at the time, they had this awesome office and Music Row, and they were figuring out how to digitize tickets. And the acquisition, I think, happened in 2010. But at that point, like digital tickets were still kind of a new thing. The majority of tickets were still actually physically printed and all of that. So it's really amazing to see just in, 13 years, how far that landscape has come. And now blockchain-based tickets are, of course, a thing as well. And it's interesting because, I've seen Live Nation and Ticketmaster lean into trying to embrace what's happening in terms of these digital tickets, because I think it creates so many supply chain efficiencies for them. But on the flip side, I think it's just entered the mainstream consciousness how much of a monopoly this is, and how little artists and the performers and the venues actually benefit from this, current situation of ticketing.
I do think, though, it's important, and Avery hit it spot on. I think the thing that's so interesting about it is, think of all the bands, right? I think Pearl Jam comes to mind for me, who like wanted to keep ticket prices low for their fans. And then you have the ticket masters who come in and say, great, you can charge whatever you want. We're going to throw 25% on top of that no matter what. And sort of give people not a great experience. When the monopoly happens, you get a kind of exorbitant ticketing entity combined with like 70% of all venues in the US under one umbrella, where they then can control both sides of the experience. And I think, we in the kind of blockchain industry look at this to say, hey, that feels like a model that can be disrupted, except that physical space is a really hard thing to disrupt.
Well, this was when I was first getting into the space and being like, okay, NFT ticketing seems like such a no-brainer. That was when I started to understand, well, the challenge is it's actually not, like, you have to get Ticketmaster on board for blockchain ticketing. Like, I remember interviewing Get Protocol, who is doing interesting things with blockchain ticketing. And you're like, oh, this is so cool. And you're like, but they actually can't just like steal, they can't just have a better product and then steal market share from Ticketmaster. Because if you are Taylor Swift, if you are insert an act above a certain size, you have to go to Ticketmaster Live Nation venues in order to perform for your like fan group, because they literally won't fit in non-Live Nation venues. And so they just have a complete hold monopoly on that segment of the market. And that's also the segment of the market that would do the most in terms of furthering NFT ticketing, because they have the most fans. They could actually get people to convert and buy tickets in a new and interesting way. I want to talk about, and maybe Sam or either of you like want to talk a little bit more about the problems with live events today. That monopoly obviously is a part of it. They're just concert venue. These things are often very extractive environments broadly, which I know, Sam, you were talking about before we hopped on. And then talk about like, where do we think tickets can actually be a solve? Like, which parts of these can tickets really solve?
Yeah, I mean, I believe, and Avery and I had an amazing conversation with Mark Michu from Salesforce a couple of months ago, and he said something that really kept sort of sticking with me and still does to this day, which is the idea that a lot of these brands, you think of a Disney, if you think of a Live Nation, they look at their most loyal customers to say, great, these people come a lot. How can I get more money out of them? Right. So the idea of like, oh, now we'll do the meet and greet, and now you and Selena Gomez can hang out, but it's going to cost you $400 in order to have that. And she like really doesn't want to hang with you anyway. She's like getting her bag. Right. So whereas I think we all think about this through the lens of Web3 loyalty membership, when we really think of the member part of membership, it really should be, how do you reward your most loyal customers? So the blockchain allows us the opportunity to say, oh, this person came to 6 events and bought 3 t-shirts. Maybe I should give them something without having to charge them, because think of the halo that causes. And that, I think, is the real disruptive opportunity of what blockchain allows. But I do believe, if you're in the corporate side of Disney, you have a price per head of every single person coming in to your park every time. And your goal is to make it from $142 to $166, right? And that difference times the tens and hundreds of thousands of people who come every single year is a dramatic amount of money. So I think they're really looking at the profit motive, where I think we kind of collectively think of what's the communal motive that sort of we can help enable, because we know that actually brings money to it, because people then happily will support you, but they'll support you because they want to, not because they're sort of being dragged into it.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, Sam knows a lot more about events than I do. We've just sort of been newer to this space, but learning every day. And I think fandom is bigger than ever. And the pandemic also, drove everyone online, but then drove people back to live events with increased appetite to actually connect with other humans, whether it's a music festival, whether it's EDM, whether it's Burning Man, whether it's a concert or, a sporting event. We actually saw those numbers really go up following the pandemic. And I think fandom is stronger than ever. In our sort of little microcosm, I think VCon was a great example of like that fandom that started digitally and was actually manifesting physically at a real event was something that was pretty amazing to see. Probably the first of its kind, or we've seen that many people sort of get together who hadn't met before and sort of gel as one community. But I think some of the broader macro challenges with events, first is just logistics. Anyone who's ever planned an event knows there is a tremendous amount of logistics that goes into it. Everything from security and bathrooms and, policies and making sure no one has a slip and fall and insurance and all of that stuff is a very real, you need professionals. You need professional production people who have done this for a long time, who understand how to manage this type of thing. Secondarily is ticketing. I think gauging supply and demand is challenging in any industry, and in few places it is as apparent as ticketing, where, okay, great. Do you want to get the biggest venue? Do you want to get a medium-sized venue? You've got to sell that out. You've got to make sure it's full because, obviously people can see that. I think supply and demand with ticketing is always challenging, especially in a post-pandemic world where consumer behavior has shifted pretty dramatically. Then the third, sort of challenge beyond just logistics and sort of gauging supply and demand with events is talent. It's making sure the talent, is able to bring people together in an exciting way. Back to my, Nashville examples, I think country musicians are randomly some of the best community builders. Growing up, one of my best friends' dad is actually in the Jimmy Buffett band. And if you've ever been to see the Coral Reefers, they can really get a crowd going. And they've, had this as their kind of core part of their business for decades now, right? They have Margaritaville, they have the franchises, they have the albums and all of that. But, no place is that as apparent as at an actual show where they bring their community together. And, they've done different versions of fan clubs and things like that, which I think have the most direct connection to what we think about as membership. And fan clubs has a lot of sort of synergy with what we refer to as Web3 loyalty programming. Whether you're talking about Kenny Chesney and his No Shoes Nation, they have this free tier and then they have a $25 tier. And what that gets you is access to exclusive merch and early access to tickets and things like that, I think are just the predecessor to what we're seeing being built today of these sort of conferences and super events of the future that are just blockchain based and blockchain enabled. But it's just a new iteration of the same consumer behavior. People love spending time together in person. They'll travel for it. They're excited for it. They want to share it on social media. They want to anticipate it. They want to enjoy the moment. Once they're there, they want to get the merch. They want to remember it. And I think the, saving of tickets is a very real thing. People save, concert tickets, they save memorabilia, they save cups from, concerts and sporting events and things that they love. So I think that what we're seeing now is this transition to some of that being virtual first, as a lot of consumers are living in this sort of digital first reality. So I just unpacked I just shared a lot of thoughts, a lot of country. Feel free to cut as needed.
Who knew your country roots, Avery? I actually did not know. So what's so funny is when I hear you talking about problems in the event space, some of this ticketing and blockchain can maybe help. Some of it just can't. And it's just humans slip and fall. And that's a thing, right? But what's so funny is when I got into NFTs initially, and VCon or VFriends was a huge part of that. But VCon even specifically was sort of a part of that. I shared this with you before, Avery, that I was doing the math in my head when I was minting my VFriend, being all right, 3 years of a multi-day conference with somebody like Gary V, what would that be worth? And I could math that out and say, okay, I'll pay half an ETH for this. But when I came at it from this perspective of, oh my gosh, and NFTs are a no-brainer as tickets because you could now cut the artists in on royalties in interesting ways, or you could cut these people in on the secondary sale, the scalper sales in a way that we currently can't do. And I guess I've done a 180. I'm I don't know, maybe that's a thing, maybe that's not a thing. Royalties seem to be a huge bitch. You could I don't know if we're even going to get there. I'd be curious your guys' perspective. But, yeah. And I'll just finish this thought with, but now why I'm bullish about it is everything you guys are getting into. And this seems to be now, my perspective on this has shifted, which is, no, it's about loyalty 3, right? It's about extending fan experience. It's about going to the show, having the NFT as your ticket, and that NFT unlocking special content behind the scenes, or getting the NFT integrated into the merch you bought at that show, and that unlocking, it's actually not about, I hate to use this word, but hopefully folks understand what I'm saying in this context, about the utility of oh, this is literally the ticket, and so there's certain smart contract things that can happen, but rather as a collectible and as an experience extender.
Yeah, I love that you just brought up that example. And I think Gary had such a vision around each initial mint needs to have a direct value. And anyone who's been to a conference, whether you've been to Consensus or you've been to South by Southwest or you've been to Art Basel, you have to pay to go to those. You have to pay hundreds or thousands of dollars to attend those types of things. And there are very real costs in terms of, location and beverages and security and all the things we just talked about, right? So there, and speakers and flying them in and, lighting and all of the things that go into it. So I think anyone who's been to a conference understands that innate value, which like you could see, Carly. And that was this sort of initial hook. And I think an initial hook that was as clear as that made a lot of sense to people in being like, I'm getting my money's worth just by buying this. The secondary elements, the royalties and the loyalty and the subsequent airdrops and the subsequent programming, that's all like sort of a, showing what's possible. But you first have to start by giving people a really tangible example so they feel like I'm not just, giving you money for a JPEG that gets me nothing. So I think that was a really critical first use case. And I actually think for a lot of enterprises and brands who may be listening to this or people who are building in this space, it's a good approach to take because you're giving your community something for a very clear value exchange right off the bat. It's not like, I'm charging you an ETH for this and it may or may not appreciate. As we all know, like that's not really the appropriate language to use when marketing an NFT due to our friends in the SEC. You've got to be really clear about what they're getting and when, and if something else happens on top of it, it's a pleasant surprise. But I think that, that was an important starting point to show to people that an NFT can have direct value. And Sam, I know you all are cooking up some cool things like this in Consensus. Like, Consensus is the biggest crypto conference that there is. I think there were 20,000 people there last year. So it's massive. And bringing this new opportunity to an audience who's already so crypto native, I think is a massive opportunity.
Before we talk about that, I do want to, because I think, Carly, there's something we should be comfortable talking about, right? If you think about the XY axis and on the X is like Burning Man to CES, and on the Y is like a networking event to the TED conference, right? Like there's so many ways one can think about where to plot your experience. But we have found recently, right? I mean, I believe Expoverse was canceled. Proof of Conference was just canceled. I think there's something around the fact that I think people think this stuff is easy. And I also think they think it's a lot cheaper than it is, right? I mean, Avery mentioned that we have Consensus, one of the biggest conferences out there. What people don't know is like just the field crew alone is 250 people. And that's just so we can keep 20,000 people informed and safe, right? And that's before all the programming team and all of the AV and all of the folks taking and checking your tickets and all of that stuff. It is a giant endeavor. And I think people love the idea of I get to be on stage and have an amazing conversation and be Steve Jobs. But the fact is it's very, very difficult to get to the point where Avery gets to look amazing on stage, right? So that's part of what we have to think about. And I don't think people think enough about a great experience is about it's a UX problem that is very hard to solve. Once you think about that, then I think you can think, how does one go about this experience? So as an example, as Avery mentioned, we have a project coming out March 2nd called Microcosms. It's like a partnership with Art Blocks. It's a piece of art. And then there is a ton of conference-like rewards that we can talk about in a minute. But for us, we decided it's 5% of our audience should be those tickets. So and there's a couple of reasons for that we should get into, but partly because we also know that, in order to keep a conference on and make the money of it, you have to actually continually charge money every year. But if there are folks who really want to be loyal and say, I want to front run the opportunity to be able to get a better deal, to have some insider access, to get some special perks, that's, I think, where NFTs are amazing, because they get people to be able to say, hey, this is going to be an amazing experience. I'd like to sort of buy in for a multiple year experience. We learned that from VCon, which was really smart, which is, let's not do this forever ticket. Let's do this limited timing ticket, but let's overcompensate with the value that we're offering. And that value can be social value. That value can be, hey, maybe there's something that I get rewarded that I don't want. I can sell it to somebody else, and maybe that helps offset my ticket. That value is also the badge value of, look, I'm an insider. I'm down with Gary. I'm down with Coindesk. I'm down with OPJ, right? And that, I think, also is something to think about, is how do you align that I get to say I was there and I was in the inner circle? And I think even that alone has a value in people's minds that we should think about. The reward systems are super fun, and we should talk about that. But I think we should think about first understanding what your event even wants to be, and is it realistic to have the event? And then how do you kind of reward, and then your economic model becomes a really complex sort of tokenomic strategy of how to think of cash versus sort of pre-selling opportunities into the future.
Y'all know I love Ledger, the world leader in critical digital asset security. When you own crypto, what you actually own is a private key that gives you access to your coins. It is imperative that you keep this key safe, and Ledger wallets are the best way to do that. The Nano S Plus and Nano X Ledger wallets, paired with the Ledger Live app, give you the best way to start your crypto journey while maintaining full control over your digital assets. Send and sign your NFT transactions with full transparency in the Ledger Live app. What you see is what you sign. And y'all have heard me talk about Ledger STAX before. Well, due to unprecedented demand, Ledger has received all the Ledger STAX pre-orders that it can fulfill through summer 2023. And so they have decided to pause the pre-orders. Ledger is incredibly grateful for the community's support and is working hard to get current pre-orders out and ready to ship so that they can make even more Ledger STAX to keep your digital assets secure. Sign up for the Ledger STAX waitlist and be the first to know when Ledger STAX are available again for pre-orders. But don't leave your digital assets susceptible to breach or hack in the meantime. Order your Nano S Plus or Nano X today by visiting shop.ledger.com or clicking the link in the show notes. I think using what you guys are doing at Coindesk is a really interesting way to take people through the thought process of like, how do you think about something like this? To set it up, I almost have these three categories in my head, and I want to get y'all's reactions to it when I think about NFT ticketing. I think there's the just direct utility, the NFT as the ticket that needs to be scanned or, and whatever. There's NFTs as a collectible experience extender that I was sort of speaking about earlier. And then there's this NFT is the access pass, which ranges from what Vayner, what VFriends did, what you're doing, which is like some number of years, 3 years access, to what we see something like Loudpunks does, which is lifetime access to something. And I love Loudpunks, but I think that is worth touching on some of that pieces. Those are kind of the three categories, or the three ways that I bucket tickets. And obviously a lot of these do some combination of all three. Are there any that we're missing? Is that how you guys think about it as well?
Yeah, I think from our perspective at Vayner, I agree with everything you just said, right? And I think all of those have like they have direct value depending on who you are. I also love, NFTs as tickets because it allows you to connect before, during, and after the event. The best thing about an NFT from a brand perspective or an enterprise perspective or a creator perspective is that this is like programmable loyalty and you can always add on to it. So before the event, you can, better understand your consumers. You can understand what they're doing. You can use this as an engagement vehicle. You can help drive sort of social chatter and social relevance. During, there's obviously you get access to the event through this mechanism. Anyone who's done an NFT ticketed event will tell you it's not perfect yet. It's still early days. There's still a little bit of manual checking that goes on at the door. That's just how it is. We're still very early to this. I think Token Proof has done a great job pioneering in this space, but they've really pioneered so far for Web3 natives who understand this stuff. If you're just a normal average Joe or Jane, you're still like, which app do I download and where do I find it? It's still like a new behavior. So I think it's important to be realistic about that. And, during the event, it can unlock discounts. It can unlock, special merch, depending on exactly what type of an NFT and ticket you have, which I think is pretty cool. And then the magic really starts to be better than the status quo after the event, in my opinion. There's the obvious, yes, you have a digital collectible and yes, I saw the Beatles first or whatever it is that you can prove it. But you can also use that as an extender to maybe those people get early access to the next one. Maybe they get something free. Maybe they get a meet and greet that's token gated. To me, the real reason to give a shit about this is that the after matters so much. Before and during is there's a clear use case, but I think after is really where the magic happens for being something that really becomes worth investing in this piece of innovation.
Yeah, I was bucketing the collectible experience extender into one, but I think you're right that they're really more separate things. So it's you have the NFT utility that gets you into the event, and maybe there's royalties baked into that in some capacity, though again, who knows with that. You've got the collectible element, which just hey, in 20 years you were at that baseball game where Pete Rose, I always use Pete Rose as an examples, which is so bizarre because nobody of my generation would have any doesn't even watch baseball, let alone who Pete Rose is. But and then there's the experience extension piece, and then there's the kind of access pass. This is a pass for 5 years or a lifetime piece. So Sam, how did you guys decide that this was the year you were going to start with NFT tickets? Because certainly you've dabbled in this, you guys have been in this space for a long time doing conferences. You could have done this last year. And how did you think about that?
It's important to do it during the bear market, of course. So, no.
Hey, this is a good time to be launching an NFT. If you're going to launch an NFT in a bear, this is a great time to be doing it. Of course.
I think for us, we and again, we did a lot of learning and, super props to what Avery and the VCon team have done. We saw what I think a lot of people did incorrectly. I think Loudpunks is a great example of it's great for the press release, but it's really hard to continually support that audience in perpetuity over all of their different events. I would not want to be, in the room when the person who created that project leaves for his next job or her next job, and suddenly you have to support this thing. It's going to be tough. So what we did was we sort of said a couple of things to ourselves, which was, one, we have a little bit more of a professional audience. So an audience that's kind of willing to spend a little bit of money, which I think is one of the challenges when you look at some of the sort of events that haven't been successful, whether or not people are willing to part with their dollars. Whereas I think when you have a B2B event, and I think, again, people love seeing Gary, so that I think the idea of spending money there makes a lot of sense. For us, though, it's like, you're going to come to the most important event in crypto. Great. We then thought, there's a networking opportunity, and also people come to Consensus because they want opportunities, right? And that, I think, is really key. So what we did was actually took a little bit of what Avery was talking about, thinking about post, but we also said what makes this a little bit magic. So our idea is, one, we believe in what happens on chain is the most important. So therefore we sort of aligned with generative art because we think generative art is the sort of native expressive form of the blockchain. That's why we work with art blocks. And then we said, what would be sort of most useful for the folks who come to Consensus? And then we created a reward structure. We have 19 different rewards, a lot of value going in, but everything from the fact of someone is going to get airdropped the opportunity to speak on stage at Consensus. Right. So imagine someone gave Carly Riley 20 minutes, talk whatever you want to talk about. That could be a career defining moment in the sort of crypto world. Right. We have 3 people are going to win 1 hour pitches or brainstorms to 3 amazing VCs. Right. So the idea is, I get to talk to Derek Edwards or Andrew from Spermion or Mags and get to pitch them. What happens if someone gets invested because of that? Right. We also have the opportunity to say, how do I make my experience there better? So it's I'd love to bring a friend. 50 people are going to get a companion ticket. Someone's going to get their hotel stay comped. What we did is we looked at a reward structure, which was all about how do we create the most value on the ground for people. And some of it is just fun rewards and merch and, signed copies of books and art. But we also said, actually, how do you make a business to business kind of conference sort of more supercharged? Well, great. If I got to speak, if I got to exhibit, if I got to meet people I really wanted to meet, that sort of was the unlock for us. The other thing that we did is then kind of what Avery was saying is we thought long tail. And so for our project, we actually re-roll our IRL rewards every year for the next 3 years. So if you didn't win sort of one of the rare rewards in 2023, if you hold it, 2024 is coming around, suddenly we've proven out a model that allows us to say, great, we're going to actually expand our IRL opportunities, and we re-roll it. So even if you have a common piece of art, you get to then still have the same chance as whoever has the rarest piece of art in order to win the IRL piece. And that's where we think it's pretty special. Not to mention that, we just looked and we said, hey, at our price, and ours is not cheap, it's 1.5 ETH, right? So we are expecting people to pay a lot, but even that 1.5 ETH is much, much cheaper than if you just came to Consensus for the next 3 years. So that's something we also thought a lot about, which was just from the get-go, you're getting better value, which is kind of like what you were saying, Carly, regarding VCon, that you're willing to pay that ticket price. And then we're great, how do we just supercharge that and think about it in the future?
Why does this make sense for you? And I think Avery and I might have similar answers on our end from a VCon and or what I'm doing with the OPJ tour stuff. But I'm curious on your side, Sam, why does this make sense for you and Coindesk from a business perspective to do it this way?
That's a great question. There's 2 reasons I would look at. One is when we look at, there's 2.5, maybe 3 million wallets total in the NFT space, but Coinbase alone has 90 million wallets. So there's a vast delta right now between those who collect NFTs and those who are in crypto or interested in crypto. So what we want to do is kind of start to shrink that if possible. There are skeptical people in the crypto industry that are skeptical about NFTs. We want them to say, there might actually be value in the NFT ecosystem. In the same way that there might be people who are really into NFTs that are not saying there's this whole world of crypto that I'm not getting access to because maybe I'm only going to these sort of NFT conferences. So we kind of wanted to see if we can cross-pollinate audiences, and I think that's really important for us. The second thing from a business case that makes sense for us is the idea of there are people who love Coindesk who have come to every consensus since 2015. How do you kind of reward them for saying, you're a little bit of an insider, so by unlocking new opportunities for them, we can create more and more value. I'm not expecting that every one of these is going to be purchased and held. I'm expecting also that there is going to be, someone who gets in and then gets a job in Web2 like big tech and doesn't come, but they get to sell it. Like that's part of why we're all doing this. But I think for us, we just wanted to sort of explore the fact, and honestly, like we have 1,000 total pieces. We may sell 482. Like I just don't know what's going to happen right now. And we're kind of okay with any of that because for us, it's more like we just think the opportunity of introducing something that is always additive in value, that every perk you get, for example, you can keep, you can gift it, you can sell it, right? So, the thing I really like, we were talking about this on a call with Avery last night, but it's like someone's going to win like a booth to exhibit at Consensus, $19,000 if you were to buy a rate card right now. But there might be a startup out there who can't afford $19,000, but maybe Avery doesn't want to exhibit and she gets that as the reward. So great. Someone says, great, I'll offer you 2 ETH for it. And she says, great, I just had my ticket for the next 3 years covered, right? But really what it did is it created opportunity for someone who wants to be there in a different way. And that's where I think the whole thing for us is like, yes, it would be great to front load some revenue for an event. But on the flip side, if we can create the opportunities and tell the stories that this stuff enables, that is the more exciting part of it for me.
Well, it's so interesting. I feel like, it's the brand value to Coindesk of being at the nexus of a community discovering another community, right? Like Coindesk becomes that brand that introduced, or Consensus becomes that conference that introduced XYZ to this other audience and this audience to that audience, like is part of the brand value it sounds like you're getting out of this. There's the economic upside of, in the short term, to your point, front loading some costs, especially during a recession, or a down market, I guess, right? Like that's, appealing. And then there's just the brand loyalty maybe that you're developing as people are having a really positive experience because they got that exhibition that they wouldn't have gotten otherwise. And there's that gamification piece. And I feel like the world is just moving to gamification. And there's almost that, like, there's that dynamic inherently with all of this of like that lottery feeling of like, what did I win? Is there a way to game this where I can, sell pieces of it? I mean, that's the interesting thing, which you just got at, but I don't know if people really like picked up on it, is you're abstracting all of the rewards away from the original NFT itself, which Gary you guys did last year for VCon. Like the tickets for VCon were airdropped separately from the tokens. I guess I'd be curious from both of you how you thought about that. I have a perspective here I'll share after, but curious, like Sam, for Coindesk, why it was a no-brainer, and Avery, how you guys felt about that on the VCon side.
Yeah, for sure. So I think Gary, Gary's vision was very specific to like fund this conference taking off for 3 years, and I don't want to speak for him and his intentions, but I think it's very likely that this conference actually might continue beyond those originally planned 3 years. We have a lot of demand. People ask every day.
Wait, what? Let's pause
as
on
I
that
said,
for a minute.
non-confirmed, will not speak for Gary, but I think it's very likely, we have a lot of inbound interest to people who want to come to the conference because they saw it on social, they heard about it, they thought it was amazing. Even quite a few of our clients, we're a professional services firm. So at VaynerX and Vayner3, like we work with Fortune 500 companies, like that's our business. And a lot of them were a little like, I don't know about this, guys. And then those of them who were able to join us last year really saw it and were like, wow, this is amazing. And now this year they're like, how do I get my ticket? And it's a new behavior, right? Getting an Ethereum-based wallet, being able to get set up with that. And that's a pretty big barrier for people who probably would be fine to just pay on a credit card if we had a normal ticketing solution. So I think that's something to explore in the future. But the original strategy of the 3 years, I think is really smart and is one that we've seen a lot of people be inspired by.
Let's just say
because
it. We'll call
it's I think it's a long enough amount of time that you can really develop a series of a program, and it's a short enough time that you can actually feel like ready to fulfill it. I think we were talking about some of the challenges with events in terms of costs and in terms of production realities and all of that. And not getting ahead of your skis with a commitment, I think really matters. I think the original lock was that was the first hook. That was like of the dinner, that was the meat. And then the potatoes are the collabs and the access and the cool stuff you can do with Gary Gary and the special tokens that get you basketball and, the Toys R Us collab, all that stuff sort of comes on top as a sprinkle. And I think it depends on who you speak to from a VFriends holder perspective, what they value the most. Some value the community and the folks that they've been able to align with. From a values perspective, the Discord is popping 24/7 of people who, of course, it's popping when Gary gets in there and gets everybody excited, but it's also just, people are building friendships in a real way around, the values of empathy and kindness and patience that Gary espouses in his content and has brought to life through the VFriends characters. Then some people really see the values of the conference. Some people love it. They're master networkers. They want to be there first. They want to take their selfie with Gary. They want to see Carly Riley and Sam and Avery, do talks, and they really enjoy that. They want to get free drinks from Captain Morgan and, free Pepsi and all the fun stuff. Some value the community, some value the event, and some value the ability to, have this as sort of a liquid investment, if you will, where if they're happy, great. And if they're not, they can sell it. You've been able to sell your tickets to events forever, but there hasn't been like a sort of clear market for it. It's always been a little bit of a gray market of like, who are you selling it to? Where is it? A dude from Craigslist? Is he coming, meeting up at a Starbucks, or like, are you transferring this through Live Nation and paying a bunch of ticketing fees? Or is it being marked up to an exorbitant fee? I think the ability to be liquid with this type of a buy is something that's really unique and unusual. But I think depending on who you speak to, they might have a different opinion of like why this matters. And from this sort of brand building perspective, I think one of the things that was genius for Gary is like building the sort of IP of VFriends, but secondarily VCon. VCon has its own branding. It has its own color palette. It has its own text. We are starting to build the brand of VCon as its own thing. It has its own website and social handles for a reason. That can kind of continue to build a flywheel under sort of Gary's brand as its own thing as well. That is, of course, very closely related to VFriends. But in the future, maybe that could go even beyond. It's a lot of seats at Lucas Oil Stadium. So let's see where the future holds.
I want to add on that on the one hand, and I think people who bought VFriends also are really buying into Gary's vision. And I think the characters within the VFriend collection really also represent his aspiration. For us, we worked with an amazing generative artist, Fahad Karim, who's part of the Art Blocks family and who's done some truly like beautiful work. We took, the approach, like our project and our rewards program evolves over the 3 years. The artwork itself evolves over a 3-year period. Mm-hmm. So the generative work itself reveals and sort of unveils different pieces. So we also love the idea of a sort of dynamism that both on the visual rarity and the visual traits matched what we were doing on the IRL side. We thought all that was a really fascinating ecosystem. And I think what's also important when you're running a business is the more you can understand about your customer, the better, right? So the fact is we have folks who are going to buy in, are going to potentially keep or sell pieces of what we give them. All of those are data points that inform us on how to make a better experience in the future. You add on top of that, what we can measure on the ground with token proof, both pre and during the event. And suddenly you have a really rich data set. We're very comfortable in that we want everything anonymized and aggregate. We don't want to identify anyone specifically. But I love the idea that I can understand how people are coming to a conference and then what they're doing at the conference because of the token gating nature. So even though we're doing it with a small subset, 1,000 max people, what that then exposes to us of how to reward loyalty in the future and being able to read those data signals is also super important. I would love to sort of flip it, Carly, back on you, because I know you are sort of creating this tour, which is amazing, and you have a loyal audience who wants to sort of get kind of closer and closer to you. You've chosen a bit of a different model, but I think that you have done like an amazing job in cultivating this beautiful audience that wants to get your knowledge and get to your guests. And so what was your thought on how to sort of make ticketing work for you?
Well, my initial thought was different than my current thought. So my initial thought was what you're doing, Sam, and what you did for VCon last year. And it's interesting to hear the evolution of the thought process that on the Vayner side, but which is let's airdrop folks tickets and then they can sell those tickets independent from their main NFT and we can keep these two things separate. The challenge with our live events, and we haven't spoken about. By the time this comes out, we'll probably have publicly talked about this. I don't know. Well, here's the thought process, y'all. So come at me, I guess. We're trying to keep these events intimate. So we're looking to keep them at like 100 people, 150 people, probably at the max. But we have 750, 800. Well, we have 1,100 tokens out there. So if we were to drop every token, for example, and then there's a debate, do you drop it per token? Do you drop it per wallet? Like, you guys know these machinations you do round and round in circles, like in these meetings. That's potentially 2,200 tickets for what ends up being like 900 max seats. And that becomes a problem, because if somebody can sell a ticket that's independent from the core NFT and somebody buys that ticket and then can't actually get into the event, that's a huge problem. So because we're limited in space, if we were like a big conference where it's 5,000 people and there was this one-to-one connection with like one NFT, like everybody who had an NFT would definitely be able to get into the event, then I think it's a no-brainer for us. We would have airdropped the tickets. Because we're not set up that way, we actually wanted to create a dynamic that was more, we didn't want to oversupply on the ticket side. So that would drive price to zero. So instead, we're going to have the NFT itself be the actual ticket. You log in through token proof. You can reserve your seat somewhere using that NFT. If you have 10 NFTs in your wallet, you can reserve 10 different seats at different events. But it became a supply demand problem of like airdropping tickets versus not.
I think that's really smart. I want to give like Andy and the VeeFriends team like a huge amount of credit for their sort of recent innovation, which is called Burn Island. Because Carly, exactly what you're talking about, I think that was the like leading thought 12 months ago. Like this space moves really fast. And, even VeeCon 2022 had a separate airdrop for tickets that were done in collaboration with Snowfro, who is the creator of Chromie Squiggle and Art Blocks. And that was a huge hit at the time. But then you're also essentially doubling the supply. And then when you add that to other initiatives that may have happened, like you need to be really smart about balancing that so that the value is there for collectors. At the top of this podcast, we talked about supply and demand being one of the biggest challenges in events. I think supply and demand is one of the biggest challenges in NFTs as well. It's gauging how many people are interested in this, what's a fair price to not price gouge, but also to make sure you cover your costs, have a little bit of room for optionality, and you don't sort of overshoot how much supply exists. So I think what we're going to see over the next year is more adding value to the core NFT instead of dropping additional. I think that has just changed a lot. The sort of how collectors are valuing those sort of additional drops. Sort of fewer, bigger, better, I think will be the move. So I like your plan.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And then I should say, like, in case hopefully nobody's getting nervous, but if anybody's like, wait, not everybody's going to be able to show up to one of these events, we have because we have an international audience who has known out the jump that we were going to have in-person events, I think there's plenty of people who aren't actually going to be able to come to our live event. So by keeping the supply basically to just the tokens themselves, I'm very confident we'll be able to serve anybody who actually wants to physically attend an event. And if you want to come to an event, you'll be able to come to a live event. So that's sort of the whole intention with this in part. But yeah, that's something that every project has to think about and determine for themselves. And,
Carly,
interesting,
can I
Sam.
ask you a question about that though?
Sure.
So, because I think both you and Avery are making an amazing point. We actually chose a different track, right? For us, we said we want to divorce the art collection piece or the token collection piece from the reward system. And so I could only imagine the challenge when, Carly, when you're sitting in a room and you're sitting next to, Jeff Bezos having an interview, and it becomes a really hot ticket, and then someone has to make the decision, do I sell my OPJ just because I want to get in that room? Right. And that, I think, was our challenge, which is Avery, I think, knows how much of a squiggle maxi I am when it comes to like Snowfro. I don't want to have to make a decision ever to sell that piece because the benefit might immediately seem really attractive. Mm-hmm. And
but
so I think
also,
it's a decision, right, that one just has to make.
Totally. Yeah. It's a decision, but it's also a different decision if you have 1,000 pieces or if you have 190,000 pieces, right? Yeah. And like you have to calibrate that against the demand and about the demand of current collectors and about the demand of, potentially new collectors. That's why, it's not a one size fits all approach. And I think if you have 1,000 pieces, it's very different than if you have 200,000.
And I think that's exactly right. And if I'm sitting in an auditorium interviewing Jeff Bezos someday and we can fit 2,000 people in that room, then I do probably airdrop those tickets for folks because we know we can meet. like my concern really did come down to somebody sells this ticket to somebody else, and now there's this crazy abundant supply of tickets, first of all, which could drive the price down because we can't meet that supply with like seats at the event.
It also makes me wonder about, something like Proof, where I do think that, Kevin has a tremendous amount of devoted fans. And I wonder if the initial thought of everyone should get to come is actually the inherent problem, right? If he had said, I have X number, 7,000 tokens out and I have 1,500 seats, and I planned a 1,500 person experience, I think Proof of Conference would have been a success. I think that Avery took a bet, and I think it paid off at VCon, that the idea kind of like, let's make sure we have room for everybody, and therefore super smart, let's get a stadium, right? Which is different than let's get a small venue that can feel intimate and can feel, interesting. I think we're seeing actually with Ape Fest a similar problem, right? They kind of outgrew all of the events that they have because now between Bored Apes, Mutants, Kennel Club, they have so many tokens out there that they can only, they need a 20,000, they need Madison Square Garden and able to satisfy that. But that's not really, I think, what the apes want, right? Like I think that becomes one of the big challenges is how do you right size your events, which any event producer needs to think about, versus what should be an ever growing community, right? To get more and more people into your funnel. And then how do you figure out the gamification to make it so that it's fair and even for people to want to attend those live events?
Yeah, and I think you're also bringing up, so I think the blockchain gives us the ability to interact post-event like never before and really use this as like an access pass, as an ongoing thing that has like real value like post the event, which is a massive deal. What I think it adds complication to, though, is you don't have the same like RSVP situation that you would have when you buy a single ticket. So, I don't know how many people are going to come to VCon this year. Like, I know when he came last year, but, there are two wonderful ladies handling VCon as the EVPs on that business. And we don't have 100% confidence of exactly how many people are going to show up. It could be 10,555, 12,555, could be 5,000, could be 8,000. I think it's, important to be sort of prepared for either outcome, which is something that you somewhat deal with normal events. There's like, if it rains, not as many people will come if there's a weather issue. But usually if people bought a ticket, they will really be aiming to come versus I don't think in the sort of Web3 communities where this is one of the pieces of value, everyone will 100% come, especially because it involves travel. There's logistics. You have to take days off, like all these things that sort of go into it. So I think Web3 events, you're never exactly sure how many people are going to show up, which I think would probably be a big challenge for an event producer.
This is something we're dealing with. I mean, people are going to have to RSVP and reserve a seat for us using their token because we need to have a sense because we're not doing a big stadium and we need to be able to control for that. And it is something you're dealing with because you're not charging extra for a ticket because it's something that people already bought. It's very easy to RSVP and say, yeah, I'm coming. Even with RSVPing, like the attrition rates here, because when you're doing something that is free because somebody has paid, previously, not just for this event, we're like very nervous about like, how do we properly account for how much attrition there might be to the event or not, or like make sure we have the people there.
By the way, there is an RSVP. I should say that for VCon.
Yeah.
It's an RSVP, but it's just not going to be the same level of certainty that you might have when someone like purchased a ticket specifically. And there's like room blocks and all that kind of thing. But I think that's sort of a unique challenge that probably many others wouldn't have. But I think broadly, like, Vayner 3, we did a little white paper on token-based experiences because I think that this is a massive unlock that a lot of enterprises just really understand. It's a clear thing, that's so divorced from speculation. Yes, it offers some liquidity and ability to, move it if you don't like it anymore. But the sort of before, during, and after components, I think are massive. And particularly for NFTs that are dropped on what we believe will be sort of the main chain, EVM compatible. I think it has this really amazing opportunity to sort of future-proof an events business. The biggest threat to a lot of brands and businesses is just being stale. Like they have to try innovation. And this allows them to do something that they were already doing while like adding this layer of innovation that could end up being massively beneficial, to 3-5 years down the road.
So as part of, for the OPJ stuff, we've got this OPJ NFT. It's backed by a bottle of gin. Some folks in my audience will almost certainly know this by this point. And then it also gives you access to this live tour we're doing, but it also gives you access to virtual events. Again, I knew that there were people in our audience who were buying this NFT who aren't in the United States, who weren't going to be able to come make it to the live tour. And this has been one of the biggest ahas for me around NFTs and ticketing. And I've given this example before, but I think it's worth it, like, to just give it again. If anybody has not heard this, like, I worked on a presidential campaign for the 2020 election cycle. And I was our finance director, so I was working with a lot of our big donors. And we would want to do these virtual events. Like, if you had given more than $2,000 to the campaign, hop on this Zoom call with the candidate. Like, we wanted to try and do that kind of thing. And it was a nightmare because you're like emailing out the people who have given $2,000 with a link to a Zoom, for example, with a password, being like, oh my God, like, please don't share it. Like, you're dealing with a political candidate who has people who hate them. You're worried about like the link being leaked. And now you have like chaos on the Zoom or somebody's like, like there was just so many risks there. And then you're like trying to track, okay, let me check who's trying to join this Zoom call against like their email address and is it the right name? And like, that was such a nightmare. Fast forward, I've done these token gated now virtual podcasts with guests and it's amazing. People of the OPJ NFT log in, token gated, they alone get the access. And then the cross collaboration is amazing. So I had Raul Pal on, for example, and he has Real Vision and he has Real Vision NFT holders. Snap of our fingers, we could add the Real Vision contract and now Real Vision holders could come and also experience that token gated content. That, like, if you haven't experienced the pain point of that, it can maybe be easy to not really realize how awesome that is. Because the alternative is like a closed platform where somebody has to like download the app or make sure they're in like some particular. It's really amazing what it unlocks, and that's been something I've been really excited about. Is these as tickets for virtual things.
I think that there's, and what you're both talking about is such a powerful thought that I think it's even hard to grasp, right? The idea that we at Consensus could have Avery or could have Gary on a stage and immediately say, you all get to now watch that session because you have either collection, right, is a big thing. Mm-hmm. And then, we're, at least Avery and I know we spent a lot of time in the advertising world pre-Web3. And we remember, I'm sure, the conversations of, oh, you know what, we'd love to reach Britney Spears fans, but Britney Spears fans also buy 7 Jeans, and Britney Spears fans also buy, this kind of.
Sam, that's a very like 2002 reference.
Well, I'm dating myself.
I mentioned
right
Pete Rose, so I can't throw stones, but
but what I'm saying is, I think that, and again, not that I want to write their business plan for them, but if I was South by and I was worried about Consensus and I was worried about VCon and I was worried about CES or the fact that Tribeca Film just did an NFT ticket, I now get to say, look at all of these people that I can get some data on and try to say, how do I make it more valuable for them now to come to mine because I can give them an offer because they came to Consensus, right? And I can do the same thing to VCon if I want, right? Like, so that is, I think, a giant unlock that people are not thinking about, the idea of wallet behavior as deterministic of whether or not someone is more valuable to you in the events world or in the consumer packaged goods world or in the auto world is still, we're at the infancy of it. But to me, it's such a magic way to think that I can just, if someone went to VCon and Consensus, I could tell so much about them and the ability for myself to be able to convince them to come to my event by giving them offers. Right. Yeah.
And Sam, what I think you're getting to, that's just like the absolute practicality of it, is like right now, it doesn't make sense for South by to change all of their tickets to NFTs because there are not enough people who care about that. However, what it does make sense for them to do is add an element of this that gives them the optionality to connect with these consumers in the future for not a lot more work that's going to help position them as more relevant and potentially future-proof their ticketing strategy. That's why I think this is something that, major festivals need to be paying attention to. And they are, right? Like, we've seen some mixed results. I think what I've seen a lot of, festivals do is lean really heavily into the Web3 audience because that's where they see there is activity. And I don't know that that's the right strategy. I think leaning into their audience and developing something that's interesting for their audience, whether they're into Rolling Loud or back to my country music example, whether they're into being a parrot head, right? Like, what do those people want? Design something for them. It doesn't have to onboard millions, but it gives a little bit more value to the people who are willing to participate in that for not a lot more cost, and allows that organization to have learnings and, a leg up, like, as ticketing evolves, which we know it will. Like, every business is change. This is clearly something that, a lot of these companies are paying attention to, but they need to embrace it in a way that actually makes sense for their consumers.
I have two thoughts on this. First, I totally agree with that, Avery, and you probably know even better than anybody on this call, like what big brands are thinking. But I would say even outside of events, I feel that way. Like, I think the time has passed. Like, it feels old now, all these like companies that are clearly trying to build a strategy for Web3 audiences. And it's like not build a strategy for their audience. And I really I think that's broadly speaking, something that these companies need to shift away from just targeting Web3 people. My own counter to that is, again, back when I was I worked on Andrew Yang's presidential campaign, and Chappelle was a supporter, Dave Chappelle. This was pre some of his more recent controversies. And he wanted to throw a live show and donate it to the campaign, like have the proceeds go to the campaign. The way campaign finance works, you can't take more than $2,800 from one person on the campaign. So something like that could be donated to a PAC or a super PAC, but that means that you as the campaign don't actually have direct control over it. So we were trying to sell the tickets as the donations, essentially. So somebody bought a ticket, that money would come from them as like a donation to the campaign was the ideal. And we set up a whole page where we could compliantly do that, because there's different, to get money as a political campaign, it's different. But we set up this whole page. We could not sell out this show. And it wasn't because people didn't want to donate. It wasn't even that. It was to change the consumer behavior, even like a little bit, to pull them off of Ticketmaster, just seemed to like break people's brains. And I was like, this is Dave Chappelle, like the height of the most popular comedian in the world. And we could not sell out his show simply because the ticket experience was different than what people were expecting. So I am really sympathetic to the fact that like, I was shocked by that. And it was such a learning of like, people do not want things to be different. If something's even a little bit different than what they're used to, or there's even a little bit more friction, they just won't do it. And we ended up just having to put the tickets on Ticketmaster, and he donated to a PAC, and hopefully I think that's all public, right? And we just couldn't end up getting it individually on the campaign because changing people's process on buying tickets was, it just like didn't work. And we had the most popular comedian in the world. You need to meet people where they are.
Yeah. You have to meet people where they are. And some people, not everyone, but some people want to participate in new things. So like, oh, that's kind of cool. I've heard about these things. I'll do it. That's not everyone. That's why, out of 20,000 people, Sam's doing it for 1,000. That's like a nice, reasonable number that you could probably change their behavior.
And 1,000 people who are already have wallets. You know what I mean? Like, they may not be into NFTs, but they at least presumably have crypto wallets. Like, and that's what's so, right, Sam?
Yes, exactly.
Yes. Because that's what's so mind-boggling is you're like, I know, like, hey, we don't know how well our audience is going to embrace this, and god damn, your audience is like at least like a crypto friendly audience, so I think that's that just shows it's hard. It's a long road to really get the consumer here.
It's a long road, but I really do believe that there will be some killer app that makes this something that consumers care about. I think we need to meet people where they are. We need to be realistic. Like, Sam, I love, your approach and also your expectations. I think they're set correctly, right? I speak to a lot of organizations and big events who assume that because they're really popular, they're going to sell out. I don't think that's the reality, especially, when you're looking at something that's a little bit more niche. But we've also moved away from calling them tickets. We call even this little white paper we did token-based experiences. We call them blockchain-based tickets, things like that. Framing it as a ticket is something that people understand, versus even the vocabulary around like NFT or token can honestly be pretty polarizing.
The other thing when I think about the experiences, like, again, we're seeing maybe Loud Punk's struggle or like not fully sell out, or now I think they sold out, but now they're below mint price. And again, I want to like applaud them. I think it's really interesting what they're doing. I don't know if the lifetime bet was the right one to make, but like really appreciate that they're doing what they're doing. When I think back to when you guys launched VFriends, I mean, the amount of materials I felt like that I saw coming out of Gary and coming out of Gary's ecosystem, like teaching people how this stuff worked was like, that was a tremendous amount of work. And I think most brands, and I don't want to speak specifically for like Rolling Loud or any of these because I don't know exactly, but like if you're going to target even a small subset of your audience, you need to just be like hitting people hard with the education on how to do this and not expecting them to go kind of find it themselves online somewhere. And like if you're the event that they want to be attending and they're your fan, like they need to be getting that information from you in terms of how to set things up. And it's not just like a one-off blog post. Like that needs to be a recurring drip that you are just dripping on your audience, which is how I felt like I was inundated. It was just like a wall of information about how to set up a wallet and over again.
I think that was really going the most purist approach. And I think that worked for Gary and that worked for VeeFriends in a way that it probably wouldn't work for a music festival, right? We've even seen this in the context of Superfest, which is something I think is a really cool concept. But the reality is it's a big chasm to cross. It's a huge change in behavior, and Gary was able to successfully do that, but I've not seen many others who are able to do that at the same level of success. And it's still very hand-to-hand combat. Like, there's a concierge on VeeFriends who literally helps people get set up and, continues to do that, because there are people who are like, I want to come to this conference, and the only way to get in is to have a VeeFriends Series 1 or sponsor VeeCon. So if anyone's interested, hit me up.
Same for the OPJ Happy Hour Tour, by the way.
Exactly.
We'll also get a ticket, so you can hit me up.
So yeah, I think that's like it takes a special kind of person and a special kind of content creator to be able to mobilize an audience like that. And it might be the right thing for Gary, and it isn't the right thing for, XYZ music festival. But I think it's right for all of these music festivals and conferences and venues to be looking into this space in a big way.
But how do they target their own audience, like we were saying, and not provide that educational piece?
So I think that you create something that they want. Like, let's just say it's a parrot head thing, right? There's a, meet and greet with Jimmy Buffett. You get to go in the plane, which is painted like a margarita. I think a lot of people would actually want that, right? Like, that's something that people would want and they would pay money for. So you're like, you want this? This is how you get it. You have to do it like this. And then you make that experience seamless. I think I've changed my perspective over this over time. I think a custodial wallet or something like that's even branded like a, Margaritaville might be an easy thing that people understand. They're not scared by. I think I saw a really awesome demo yesterday from the Bitsky team, and they've got a great custodial wallet product. So everybody check that out if you're interested. There are so many wallet as a service providers springing up right now. So if I was, planning a parrot head, for parrot heads, I would think about what they really want, design an NFT that unlocks access to that at a small scale, and do it in a way that feels on brand and natural and not scary and signing a, token hash transaction with a bunch of digits after it.
Yeah, I think that's right.
I think what you're saying, though, is really both the opportunity and the problem, which is, as Carly mentioned, like our audience is the most crypto native, and we still have to get them over the line, right? Even Gary, and again, VeeFriends has been a miraculous success, but he has millions and millions of followers, and there's thousands of people in that ecosystem, and he had to drag them, and he did the work to get them there. I think what you're saying is the right thing, which is we are all waiting for that moment when we can stop saying blockchain and stop saying NFT and stop saying token and layer 1, layer 2, and just say, hey, this is your opportunity to come play with us, right? Like that's all it needs to be. And whether, the ones who want to take the extra step, the 10% extra who want to say, you know what, I'd love to pull this over because I am interested in this, I can do that. Or the Starbucks model, someone suddenly offers you money for a stamp that you earn because now you're playing in Odyssey instead of on their regular app. That I think is the real power of what we're all talking about. It just is. I hate the term we're still early because I just think that it is what it is. But I think the fact is, I think that we're all designing experiences that we don't have to sort of change consumer behavior so much for. And up until this moment, we've had to do that too much. And it's caused problems. We know every page you put in a web page, someone drops off so you don't get that sale. We're doing that times 10 in blockchain right now. So, our project, your project, Carly, what VeeCon has done, all of the amazing steps that get us there, we're still a couple of years away from where we truly want it to be. But I think the opportunity is there to say, again, going back to our first thing here, how do we be additive to the consumer experience instead of extractive from the consumer experience, and focused on what value is for our most loyal customers is really where we should all be focused.
That's a great note on which to end. Unless you guys have anything else to add, but yes, ditto, agreed.
Check the show notes for all of our links.
Show notes. What he said.
Thank you so much for having us and partnering, Carly. Sam, always a pleasure to get to hang out with you, and especially when we get to have Carly in the mix.
Thank you both so much. This was so fun.
Yeah, can't wait to do it again.
Thank you
so much for watching this episode of Overpriced JPEGs. If you liked this conversation, if you liked this episode, please go ahead and hit subscribe. It helps me out, it helps the show out, and it means you will get alerts and updates when we post new content. Thanks again.